Hey, what's going on? SirBlackson97 here, back with another casual deck profile. Today we'll be profiling the casual Labrynth deck. This deck profile is going to be a little bit different as we're only using 50 cards in total, since we're only using one pack of sleeves. So 40 in the main deck, 10 in the extra deck. You don't really have to worry about much, except some of your cards do lock you into fiend monsters, either from the extra deck or just throughout the turn in general, or the main deck. So that's really the only thing you need to take in consideration when building out your deck. Starting off, we have a bit of a Nightmare core with 2 Phoenix, 2 Cerberus, 1 Unicorn, 1 Griffin. Nightmare Link monsters are pretty cool. You can discard a card to activate a unique effect, and then if they were co-linked, you get to draw a card. Along with, while being co-linked, they have some sort of passive effect that goes off with them. I think Griffin is the only exception. His just goes off with linked monsters in general. But for the most part, let's get into the unique effects. Phoenix lets you discard a card to target and destroy a spell or trap, and then also protect your co-linked monsters through battle destruction. Cerberus lets you target and destroy a special summon monster in the main monster zone, and protect your co-linked monsters through effect destruction. Unicorn targets and spins a card back into the deck, while also having a unique draw effect. Pretty much if you have different Nightmare monsters that are co-linked, you get to draw cards during your draw phase up to the number of co-linked monsters with different names. So if you have like 2 or 3 co-linked, that's a pretty good draw phase you're pulling in. Usually doesn't happen too often, but it's something to consider nonetheless. And then Griffin lets you set a spell or trap back from your graveyard. You can't activate that turn, but considering Labrynth's focuses on a lot of traps and disruptions, even during your opponent's turn, that's not really too big of an issue for us. And then obviously it has its special summon monsters on the field cannot activate their effects unless they are linked. So that one's a little bit more broad, as you don't need to have a co-linked monster since it's a link 4, so you're putting in a lot of resources for it. So it's a little bit more of a broad kind of floodgate. Up next, we have 2 copies of Beat Cop from the Underworld. Requires 2 monsters, but if you use 2 dark monsters with different names, you get to apply a different effect, which is to tribute a monster, then target a face-up card you control, place a patrol counter on it. If that card would ever be destroyed by battle or card effect, remove the patrol counter in its place. So a nice little form of protection for your cards, whether it be your main deck boss monsters, other link monsters, or just your field spell or continuous cards. Up next, we have 1 Dispatcherazzi. Anytime a monster you control is targeted for an attack, you can redirect it to Dispatcherazzi, regardless if you do so. If Dispatcherazzi is destroyed by battle, you can destroy that battling monster that battled with it, and then gain life points equal to half of its original attack. Nice form of non-destruction, or non-targeting destruction, but it only has 1 attack, so you might be taking a good amount of damage, regardless if the life point gain is pretty decent. You'll still take a pretty good hit. And then finally, 1 copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. Requires 4+ effect monsters, but you can use 1 monster your opponent controls. It has 2 effects based on if it was link summoned, or if it's currently link summoned, and then it just has an additional effect regardless of that. The first of its link summoned effects is, if it's link summoned, you can negate all face-up effects, or effects of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls. And then as a link summoned card, it's unaffected by your opponent's activated effects unless they specifically target this card. Also, once per turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect that special summons a monster from the graveyard, like a Monster Reborn, you can negate that activation. So pretty nice final boss monster. It is a fiend as well, so it does scooch on by with some of the requirements the deck has, so it's definitely something to invest in if you're looking into getting a really big sort of extra deck boss monster. Moving on to the main deck lineup, we have 3 copies of Ariane, the Labyrinth Servant, and Ariana, the Labyrinth Servant. Names are very similar, but their effects are very different, so it's sometimes easy to confuse them as their names are quite similar, but we'll go over what kind of makes each one tick differently. Ariane lets you send a normal trap from hand or that is set on the field to the graveyard to special summon a level 4 or lower fiend from your deck in defense position. And then a lot of Labyrinth cards have this sort of unique effect where if a monster ever leaves the field because of a normal trap effect, you get to apply a sort of additional effect. Ariane and Ariana let you draw a card, and then special summon a fiend monster from your hand or set a spell or trap. Ariana, when normal or special summon, lets you search a Labyrinth card from deck to hand, but also worth noting that Ariana only lets you use 1 of her effects per turn, and only once that turn. It's a little bit different from Ariane in that she's either an archetypal searcher, or kind of goes with that sort of draw 1 card and then search out a special summon a fiend from hand. So a little bit of choices to be made, but definitely worth running 3 of each. Up next, we have some of our main deck boss monsters. We have 1 Labrynth Archfiend and 2 lovely Labrynth of the Silver Castle. Labrynth Archfiend gains 400 attack for every different named normal trap in your graveyard. Your opponent cannot target fiends for attacks unless it's Labrynth Archfiend. If you activate a trap card during either player's turn, you can special summon this card from the hand. If special summoned, set a normal trap from your deck, but it must be a trap that can only be activated when an attack is declared. So something like Mirror Force, Sakuretsu Armor, Magic Cylinder, that kind of thing. Even Jelly Cannon. A bit of a newer age trap, so definitely something to consider when building out your deck, as you do have to follow those kind of restrictions. Lovely Labrynth does not have a special summoning condition of her own, but that's okay, as there are plenty of cards like the Labyrinth Servants or even one of their own archetypal traps that can get you Labyrinth monsters pretty quickly. So we're not really concerned about tribute summoning this, but regardless, her effect is your opponent cannot activate monster effects in response to your normal traps. You can also only use the following effects as a hard once per turn. Target a normal trap in your graveyard, set it to your field. You cannot activate it unless you control a fiend monster. And then it has the standard Labyrinth effect of if a monster leaves the field because of a normal trap effect. Lovely Labrynth lets you randomly destroy a card in your opponent's hand or destroy a card on their field. This is another form of non-targeting destruction, so it's really nice to work with. Obviously, without the special summoning condition, she's kind of a 1 to 2 of, but I find 2 copies is still pretty adequate. Because this wouldn't be a trap archetype without hand traps, Labrynths have 3. We have Ku-Klok, Chandragleer, and Stovey Torby. You can kind of vary up your quantities and how many you're running. I prefer 2 to 3 Ku-Kloks and then 1 to 2 of the others. Pretty much how they work is Stovey Torby and Chandragleer let you send this card from hand or field to graveyard and discard a card to set a Labyrinth spell or trap from your deck. While Ku-Klok lets you just discard itself to allow a trap card to be activated the turn it was set. So it's nice they kind of all combo and pair with each other. And then, of course, they have the usual shared effect of if a monster leaves the field because of a normal trap, you get to apply a different effect. Stovey Torby lets you special summon itself, Chandragleer goes back to the hand, and Ku-Klok lets you choose whether to add to the hand or special summon. So that's kind of why you want to experiment and vary with some of your ratios and quantities, as different effects may come up in different situations. Up next, we have a bit of a departure from the Fiends, but we'll explain in a minute how it still works with the deck, even with those restrictions. We have Lord of Heavenly Prisons. We're running 2 copies. During the main phase, you can reveal it, and it stays revealed until the end of your opponent's turn. While it's revealed, set cards that include spell or traps and set monsters cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. If a set spell or trap is activated, you get to special summon this card. And then, if it was revealed when it was special summoned, you could set a spell or trap directly from your deck, but banish it during the end of your opponent's next turn. You can only use 1 effect per turn, so you can either choose to reveal during your turn, wait till your opponent, then activate that card, or kind of just special summon it and then get a nice level 10 onto the field even during your turn. So it kind of lets you choose sort of what path to take, but if you're able to pull off the reveal and the special summon, it definitely pays off quite a bit. Up next, we have a bit of a Lament Core, 2 copies of Loris, 1 copy of Alice. Alice, when normal summon, lets you revive a Lady of Lament from the graveyard. And then you can banish a trap from hand or graveyard to special summon her. If she's tributed or destroyed by an opponent's card, you get to add a Fiend monster from deck to hand whose attack and defense combined equal 2,000. This is a pretty consistent qualifier for a lot of Ladies of Lament. Loris has 1,500 attack, 500 defense. For other examples, stuff like Lilith has 2,000 attack, 0 defense, so it's really not that hard to find a card that fits Alice's requirements. And then our 2 copies of Loris, what they do is target 3 or 6 of your normal traps that are banished or in the graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, and then draw 1 card for every 3 traps returned this way. If another monster is tributed, or if a normal trap is sent to the graveyard by opponent's card effect, you get to target a normal trap in the graveyard and set it to your field. So it's a nice bit of recovery and protection, even if your opponent's still messing with some of your back row. Loris can help you retrieve them and get them going still. Especially if you're using Ku-Klok as well, you can also activate those the turn they were set. So it's a nice little combo engine going right there. Finally, for our main decks, we have Bahalusha, the Grand Radiance. This one also kind of works around the Fiend special summon requirement, as it's mostly being tribute summoned. You can tribute summon it by tributing 1 effect monster, During your opponent's main phase, if they ever add a card from deck to hand except by drawing it, and this card is in your hand, you can immediately tribute summon this card. If it's normal or special summoned, you can make your opponent banish the top cards of their deck equal to the amount of cards in their hand. They shuffle their hand back into the deck, and then those cards they banished, that becomes their new hand. It's a nice way to kind of screw with your opponent's hand state, especially when used in combination with lovely Labrynth. You're really able to kind of mess with your opponent's hand economy and kind of just mess around with their cards in general. So if they're doing a lot of draw power, get YuGiOh on the field, or if they're searching specific combo pieces, you can definitely mess with your opponent's hand quite a bit. Moving on to the spell cards, we have 2 copies of Labrynth. Very great field spell name. If you activate a set Welcome Labrynth normal trap, you get to also apply this additional effect. After that, destroy 1 card on the field. If you activate a non-Labrynth normal trap, you get to special summon a fiend monster from hand or graveyard. This is another way to get lovely Labrynth onto the field without having to tribute summon. If you Foolish Burial her and then just use Labrynth, that's another way to get her out onto the field without having to worry about tributing 2 monsters. Up next is 2 copies of Labrynth Setup. Get to target 2 of your Labrynth spell or traps that are banished or in the graveyard. Shuffle them into the deck. Then if you control a fiend monster, set non-Labrynth normal traps with different names directly from your deck, equal to the number of monsters shuffled back into the deck. Really nice recovery card. It's more of a Labrynth recovery than a setup, as it's targeting, non-Labrynth traps to be set up, but still, you're putting out some good traps and you're definitely prepared to mess with your opponent. And it's a quick play spell, so you can even activate it during their turn. So if your opponent tries to activate some sort of card that destroys it, like a Twin Twisters, you can immediately just chain on to your Labrynth setup, get new spell and traps onto the field, and just prepare for your opponent's next move or encounter. Up next, we have 1 Raigeki, 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, just for clearing out monsters and spell and traps, respectively. Especially in mirror matches, spell and trap removal is going to be very much your best friend. Up next, we have 1 copy of Pot of Prosperity. Really good pot card. It's still a bit pricey, even with the reprint in the 2022 tins. So if you want to use something like Pot of Extravagance, Pot of Desires, or any just general pot card or draw power card like Allure of Darkness, that is definitely up to you and up to your preference. But regardless, we're going to profile Prosperity today, where we banish 3 or 6 cards of our choice from our extra deck. We banish them face down. Your opponent takes half damage for the rest of the turn, but depending on the number of cards banished, we will excavate from the top of our deck that same number of cards, choose 1 to add of our hand, and then the rest gets shuffled to the bottom of the deck in any order. So it's a nice way to just dig for those combo starters or additional combo pieces, or just any card we really need at the moment that we want to set and then use like Coup Clock just to get that trap card activated that turn. We can definitely pull that off as well. Moving on to the Labrynth traps, we have 2 copies of Welcome Labrynth. This is their signature trap card. Special summon a Labrynth monster from deck. We're locked into fiends from the deck or extra deck for the rest of this turn. So this is a nice way to explain how Lord of Heavenly Prisons and YuGiOh still work. Lord of Heavenly Prisons special summons from the hand, so we never have to worry about that deck restriction. And also YuGiOh is a tribute summon, so we don't have to worry about that either. So that's a nice way that those cards still work with the deck, because Welcome Labrynth is locking us into the deck or extra deck for fiend monsters. And then it has the standard, Welcome Labrynth also has the standard, if a monster leaves the field because of a normal trap effect, except the turn it was sent to the graveyard, Welcome Labrynth can reset itself back onto the field. Nice way to continue its effects. You definitely want to run like 2 to 3, but if you want to run a few less copies just because you'll be relying on that recovery effect, that's definitely up to you as well. We're also running 2 copies of Fair Welcome Labrynth. When a monster declares an attack while control a fiend, target 1 card on the field, negate the attack, destroy the targeted card. Then you can set 1 non-Labrynth normal trap from your hand or deck. Definitely a nice way to negate attacks, and it definitely works with Labrynth Archfiend, as well as destroying some cards on the field and getting more resources out onto the field as well. We also have 2 copies of Labrynth Barrage. When you activate a set normal trap, except Labrynth Barrage, this effect will copy that effect. And then also, until the end of your opponent's next turn, after this card resolves, your opponent takes no effect damage. Just something to consider if you're running a more burn-focused trap card deck. That is something to keep an eye out for, is that Labrynth Barrage will lock you in as soon as it resolved. Up next, we have 3 copies of Archfiend's Ghastly Glitch. This is a non-once per turn trap card, so that's definitely something to consider maxing out on. If you control a Fiend monster, target a card on the field, destroy it, then send a Fiend from deck to graveyard. Definitely want to take advantage of this not being a once per turn trap, as you can definitely clear out the field and fill up your graveyard at the same time, all at the measly cost of just having a Fiend monster. Up next, we have 3 copies of Magic Cylinder, more of our battle traps. Your opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster, negate its attack, and if you do, inflict damage equal to its current attack. So if you're fighting something like Grand Maju, you'll be able to do burn damage equal to their current attack, not just their original. It was made quite a long time ago, so stuff like original attack was never really taken consideration. So that's definitely something to come in handy if you really want to do some good burn damage against your opponent. And then finally, 2 copies of Compulsory Evacuation Device. Another non-once per turn, target a monster on the field, return to the hand. You can even target your own, so if you want to bounce back a Lord or another like Labrynth card and then recycle their effects for the following turn, that is definitely something you can use. So it's a nice way to extend even your own combo pieces if you want to get off more effects. That'll do it for today's deck profile. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time when we do an updated deck profile with the Darkling Blast material. See you all next time.